What is one lie your parents told you as a child that completely screwed you up? We used to take long road trips throughout the Rockies, and whenever we passed a landslide falling rock sign, my parents told us kids that if we were too loud we would start a landslide and kill us all. Result, hours of silence in a car with 3 kids. Scarring, minimal. When I was little, Dad and I had a routine where he would ask my teddy bears what their favorite foods were. Eventually he started saying that bears ate random objects. Never made me seem messed up until in class one day, when the teacher asked what is a bear's favorite food, and I blurted ping pong balls. When I was growing up my mother told me if I was intimate with a guy, I would get pregnant. In her eyes the more she scared me about sex, the less chance I would have it. Thinking back this caused me to shoplift pregnancy tests because I kissed my boyfriend and our lower parts touched through underwear and pants. There was one instance where I had kissed someone while sitting on their lap, 9th grade, and I started bawling saying I was going to get pregnant. It messed me up because I would ask her about what I learned in sex ed and she told me that I was extremely fertile. She told me actions that would not normally get a girl pregnant would get me pregnant. Messed me up for a long time. When I was 5 my mom asked my dad what he wanted for Christmas. His response was a blowjob, not knowing I was in hearing range. When I asked what a blowjob was, they told me it was a snowblower used for clearing sidewalks. The next week I went to see Santa at the mall, and I told him my daddy wanted a blowjob for Christmas. Oh, where do I start? When I was 5 my mom was putting my jacket on and told me we were going to the flea market. I asked her what that was, to which my dad yelled it's a market full of fleas. I cried, terrified for a solid hour. Same thing happened when I got chicken pox. You're turning into a chicken. Or when my mom went somewhere and I didn't know so I'd ask my dad, who said she ran away. Oh, but the worst was when my dad told me if anyone pushed my belly button, my arms and legs would pop off. I didn't let anyone near my belly button for ages. Edit: why the hell did this get downvoted so much? No. Ice cream trucks only play music when they're out of ice cream. Didn't screw me up, but I figure someone will have a laugh. I remember asking my mom why she doesn't have a PP and she just replied in a militaristic voice, "Lost it in the war." It didn't screw me up, but it's funny. Here I am, a 4-year-old Belgian kid on a trip through the USA with his parents. We're waiting in line to order something that I don't even remember. Waiting in front of us is a goddamn cowboy. He's wearing cowboy boots, a cowboy hat, and he has a ducking gun sticking out of his pants. In my 4-year-old mind, it was a cowboy, no doubt. This was cowboy country, after all. I ask my parents, is that a real cowboy? They tell me, of course he is. Silly. Anyways, we're discussing what we're going to order. I want Coke but my mom wants me to have milk instead. I almost throw it fit. Milk? Please. I want Coke. My dad looks at me and he says, "You see the cowboy? Who is? I do not. Just ordered milk and downs it right at the counter. He drinks milk. Cowboys drink a lot of milk." To me, that guy was the epitome of badass. Suddenly, milk was badass. A lot of milk was consumed after that. What I learned: America is full of cowboys who walk around with guns in their pants. Cowboys ducking love milk. Milk is ducking badass. I ducking love milk. It's now 17 years later, almost 9 AM, and I haven't slept yet, and there's empty milk glasses on my desk. Milk. I had a bad speech impediment as a kid. At one point, I asked my mom what homicidal meant, but because of my derpy speech, she misheard homicidal as homosexual and told me that it was when a man loved a man or a woman loved a woman. I am very glad I had that one corrected before I came out to her as homicidal. That would have been a much more awkward conversation. My friend told his daughter when she was little that you had to eat the fortune in a fortune cookie to make it come true. She was truly embarrassed when she went out to eat with her friends when she was 16 and ate paper. I wish I had a funny story for this one, but I don't. I had an abusive father who would regularly beat me from 3rd grade to 8th grade. He told me that if I were to ever tell anyone, like police or teachers at school, Child Protective Services will put me into foster care and my foster parents would beat me even more than he does. I believed him and never said a word to anyone. Even when people at school asked me why I had trouble sitting flat on my chair, I had black and purple whelps on my butt and legs that hurt like hell. No surprise that this completely destroyed my self-esteem, and I did many self-destructive things for years afterwards. Even to this day, approximately 10 years later, if I get too drunk I'll start crying and talk about my father. My mom told me that there was a sharp bone in my nose that would cut my finger off if I tried to pick it. Scariest it ever as a kid. My best friend, Kyle, died when I was 9 years old. When I asked my mom how he died, she came up with a bogus story of he fell down the steps outside his house. Naturally I accepted this as it came from my mom. Years later, I still think about him every day. I thought about it and one day realized that he lived in a mobile home at that time. I brought that up to my mom and asked how many steps were outside his trailer. She told me it was 3 steps, and I had noticed she was apprehensive when I asked her. Come to find out years later, he was murdered by his stepdad. Hit him in his 9-year-old head with an aluminum baseball bat. Even better, the stepfather was set free due to lack of circumstantial evidence. Even though everyone knew he had done it, I guess the dent in the child's head wasn't solid enough for the GA jurors. Anyways, I have always had issues trusting people and trusting my mother after this. This honestly was when I officially lost my innocence as a child. Now I have a son, and in honor of my long past best friend, I named him Kyle, and he is my life. When I was like 4, I had a pretty rational view on stuffed animals. They were cute and that was about it. Well, my stepdad had this long talk with me, utterly convincing me that the whole premise of Toy Story applied to my toys as well. They come alive when I'm not looking, etc etc. Because of this, I got battered insane about taking care of them. Every time I dropped one I had to bandage it up and put it on bed rest. I used to get really angry yelling, I know what you are, why won't you just talk to me? This went on until I was about 8 or 9. Side note, I was also told by my stepdad that if I didn't eat the food he packed in my lunch, assassins that he had hired would tell him and ultimately kill me. That was about age 6-10. My father convinced me that the vowels were A-E-I-O-U and sometimes M. Really screwed me up in kindergarten. Bonus, I explained to my father what a troll was this past Thanksgiving. He was quite pleased that there's a whole group of people like him hanging out on the internet. My girlfriend at the time had just left me. My roommate bailed out the last 5 days before rent was due. I had just lost my job. Folks had said that I was welcome to stay with them. I had this adorable pit bull puppy that I had owned for a few months and I had gotten absolutely attached to the little guy. Without question the greatest happiness in my life at the time. 2 days before I was to move in with my family, my dad came out and said that there was no way that we could keep the dog. Family had bankruptcy, had to rent a house, and that the landlord just would not allow it. I was devastated to say the least. I had to give up the last shred of happiness in order to move on with my life. Turns out, landlord never gave a duck. My parents had brought their 2 dogs and 1 cat to the house and just didn't want me bringing my dog because your dog would crowd the house. I never wanted to cry so hard. I found out when I talked to our landlord. I may have forgiven my dad over it, but I will never forget what he did. Edit. I got a lot of questions about what happened to my puppy Hans. Little guy's in a good home now with a friend that offered to take care of him. The owner is a good friend of mine. So although I no longer have Hans, I'm relieved to know that he's in a good place. My dad told me that guacamole was chopped up lizards. Now I can only eat guacamole I have prepared myself or have seen prepared. That I need to get a college degree to be successful. However, it can be in anything I like because then I can become gainfully employed and enjoy my life as a historian. When I was little, maybe 9 years old, I masturbated for the first time. I showed my mom because I was confused and didn't understand what was coming out of my D. Anyway, she tells me not to do that or I'll get freckles all over my hands. I think, man, I would really like some more freckles. So I start rubbing cum on my face. One day, I sit down to start masturbating. Because it's become a daily routine. Cum. Rub. ? Freckles. And it won't stop getting bigger. I kid you not. It's like 2 feet long. I eat myself. I cum, and spaghetti everywhere. To this day I am a ginger. Got just everything about God. Not a deliberate lie, but both my parents were smokers. My dad still is. My mom quit a few years ago, and as a kid I interpreted that to mean that all adults smoked, and had to start smoking eventually. I knew it was bad for you, but I thought it was required for some reason. I actually couldn't comprehend my health teacher when she said she didn't smoke, thinking she meant that she just didn't do it that often. As part of that unit in health class we wrote promises to ourselves about abstaining from smoking. This was maybe 3rd grade, and I wrote I will not smoke until I am 56, hoping to put it off for as long as possible. I don't think there was a specific epiphany or realization that that wasn't true, but thankfully I figured it out eventually. When I was a little kid, my mom told me she had mailed my pacifier to the moon. Years later, going through boxes, I found it, opened my eyes. Man. When I was young, I was always amazed at all the random stuff my dad knew. He had answers to every question. I would ask him how he knew all this stuff, and he swore up and down that there was a book they gave all dads at the hospital when their first child was born that told you everything you needed to know. He also told me that he couldn't show me the book, otherwise the people at the hospital would come and take it back. For years, I tore the house apart every chance I got looking for that book. It had the answers to life, the universe, and everything. Of course I wanted to read it. I was constantly getting into trouble for rifling through stuff in an effort to find the book, but I never admitted why I did it, because I was convinced that if my dad knew I was looking for the book, he would just hide it in a harder to find spot. I didn't figure out the book didn't exist until I was 10 or so. My parents led me to believe they were married. When I turned about 16 or so, it finally hit me that I never saw any wedding photos. When I confronted them, they told me they never went through with it. They had a wedding planned in February of '84, before I was born. But when the date came around, there was a huge blizzard and they never rescheduled. They then also admitted that my sister has a different father. She didn't know. Basically giving me the impression that I am extraordinarily clever or gifted in some intellectual way, when really I was just a little more interested in certain school subjects than other kids. I did reasonably well in my high school exams, while barely doing any work at all. This led me to believe I could probably do the same in university, because I was just clever. It then took some degree of failing to eventually realize that cleverness is something that comes from work, ultimately, not natural ability. Also, on a less dramatic note, my dad, for some reason, jokingly pronounces the word caliber as caliber. Took me just a couple decades to figure I had been saying it wrong all these years. Could no one really have the honesty to just correct me? I don't know if this was necessarily a lie, but my mom would always tell me I wasn't sick enough to stay home from school, even though I liked school, and only ever asked to stay home if I was throwing up. To this day, I still won't go to the doctor because I don't think something is wrong with me. Even when I had a kidney infection, my friends had to force me. My mom was very vague about the way girls work down there, so until someone was kind enough to explain it to me in 8th grade instead of laughing at me, I believed that girls just had nothing in the front and everything, peeing, pooping, childbirth, was done out the back. Not quite a lie, but definitely scarring. On Halloween, when I was about 4 years old, I went out trick-or-treating with my parents early in the evening, and then when we got home they let me help give out candy. After a while I was sitting by myself, giving candy to whoever came by while my parents were in the other room. So I thought, turns out my dad has snuck out the back of the house and put on a werewolf mask. He then came to door like any other trick-or-treater, but immediately grabbed me and started running down the street with me. I think he was more surprised out of the two of us. He was expecting some kind of reaction and I simply froze up and went completely silent for a long time afterward. Whoa, looking back on this it seems pretty bad. My dad told me that soda fountains are real fountains of soda found in nature, like a geyser or a spring in a hillside. Although restaurant employees had to go outside and fill buckets with soda from nature's soda fountains to refill the drink machines. That people don't judge other people based on how they look. Probably not what you're looking for, but my mom always used to tell me that my dad was abusive and a cheater and a drunk and blah blah blah. Anyway, in my teenage years I still believed this, and when I had to go to my dad's for the weekend I would often run away and get picked up by the cops and brought to my mom's. It wasn't until I turned 19 that I realized my mom was manipulative and selfish, which is how she won custody of me in court. She had me lie to the lawyers and everything. It ducked me up bad. But I think it ducked up my dad even more. I moved in with my dad a few years ago for while I go to university, and he said every cent he paid in child support was worth it to have me here with him now. I don't know how it all turned out like it did, but I'm finally happy with where I am. My dad once convinced me that my mom has had consensual sex with a dolphin. That politically they felt the statutory abuse laws that would apply to two 16-year-olds having sex were ridiculous, and that they didn't see a moral issue with teens having sex. This became a problem when I lost my virginity at 16, told my mother, and was kicked out for it. This didn't mess me up, but is a funny story nonetheless. My dad would consistently tell me that my mom was the drummer for the Beatles. I believed this until I was about 6 or 7, I think. Because in my little kid mind, why couldn't she have been in the Beatles? Things became awkward when I tried to tell my friends my mom was a famous drummer. They were much more skeptical than I, and that is when I came to realize I was the daughter of a troll dude. My dad always told me that eating the crust on my sandwiches would make my hair curly. I believed that for far too long. Every time I would get a whiff of weed, my parents would tell me it was skunk. I don't know why I believed them, but I was horribly, embarrassingly corrected my first week of college. Lying is absolutely the worst thing you could ever do. Full stop. I asked why mom kept yelling "Oh sweet Jesus," and dear God. Some nights in my parents' bedroom, my dad told me that my mom was just fervently praying. So the next time I heard it I went in to join the prayer. Some things cannot be unseen. I had a wart on my hand and my mom bought me some wart removal paint. The box said do not use for genital warts. I asked my mom what genital warts are and she said warts on your feet. Cue about 5 years later in health class. The teacher asks if anyone knows what genital warts are. I insisted, for quite a while, that the teacher didn't know the first thing about warts. Overheard my parents arguing when I was like 11. Heard my dad say I'm not his son. Still don't know if it's true. Never been able to ask. That homosexuality is not natural, is wrong, is a choice, and that homosexuals go to hell. I wonder how they'll take my coming out. My mom told me several times when I was little that I should never get married and I should never have kids. It wasn't until my gender studies class, freshman year of college, 14 years ago, when we were put into groups to talk about what our parents told us about marriage, that I found out it wasn't a normal thing to hear as a child. Scumbag mom, when I asked for a Super Nintendo, she told me I should wait because the Super Duper Nintendo was coming out. My first dog died when I was 5. I was so sad, and my mom only made this worse by saying there's no doggy heaven. When I was like 11 or 12, I found a blank VHS of some really disgusting, up-close porn in my dad's TV VCR combo in his apartment after my parents separated. He told me it was my mom and stepdad in the video. I don't really remember the purpose of telling me something like that, but I know he was lying and have been scarred ever since. He also kept an army duffel bag in my closet a couple years prior to the last incident when my parents were still living together, and told me it was just old clothes. When he went missing for a couple of weeks, I decided to go through it and it was full of stuff like blow up dolls and a bunch of weird shit like that. He was probably hiding it from my mom. My mom told me as a little girl that periods was something you got because you were dirty and didn't shower enough. Made me think for years that I was just a bad person who was full of some sort of dirt I could never get rid of because I was so tainted. Turns out I'm an okay person, and it's just uterine lining coming out because I didn't make a baby that month. Load off my mind. My dad played a game with 5-year-old me and my 4-year-old brother. He would tell us that the UPS trucks came to snatch up bad boys. The first time he told us this, we were outside in the front yard with him goofing off. Immediately we ran for our lives back inside the house. For the next few years we were on high alert and remained inside the house when we saw the UPS truck. That scared me for the longest time. Oh god. My parents told me that hiccups meant that I was growing. Later, in 5th grade when we were learning about cell mitosis, I raised my hand and professed my knowledge that cells splitting and hiccups were related and caused me to grow. They all laughed. And this is exactly why psychotherapists like myself are kept in business. Mommy and daddy wished for you and that's how you were born. I wasn't screwed up for long. But when my parents told me that carrots help you see, I did the weirdest damn thing. I would go into my room, pitch black, door closed. I would kick and punch my toys everywhere in the room. I somehow thought that an improved vision meant that I had super strength or something. I also asked Santa for a baby goat for Christmas because my parents told me that I could ask Santa for anything that I wanted for Christmas. My mom told me the way she got pregnant was by praying super hard. So then I refused to pray in church. Just mouthed the words so I wouldn't get pregnant. Took me an embarrassing while to figure out that wasn't how it worked.